There are certain truths that children understand instinctively, truths that most adults spend a lifetime desperately trying to convince themselves are not real. One of those truths is simple and brutal. Not every person who smiles at you across a dinner table actually wants you at that table. Some of them are calculating exactly how long before they no longer have to pretend. I learned that truth on a Sunday evening in October, in a house that smelled like expensive candles and old money. Sitting across from a woman who had decided the moment she met me that I was an obstacle to be removed. I just did not know it yet. My name is Diana. I was 29 years old when my entire life cracked open like a fault line, shifting beneath a city that thought it was standing on solid ground. At the time, I was a contract attorney at a mid-size firm in Atlanta, specializing in estate law. The irony of that is not lost on me. I spent my days untangling other people's inheritance disputes, protecting assets, closing loopholes, and I never once saw the one being engineered right inside my own marriage. My husband and I had been together for 4 years and married for 2. We met at a charity gala through mutual friends. And I will admit that in the beginning, everything about him felt like the answer to questions I had not even finished asking yet. He was charming and attentive. And he had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in every room the two of you shared. I was in love. The way you are only in love when you are young enough to still believe that love alone is sufficient armor. His mother was another story entirely. From the very first dinner I attended at the family estate in Buckhead, she studied me the way a jeweler studies a stone she suspects is synthetic. Her name was Eleanor. And she was the kind of woman who wore her wealth like a second skin pearl earrings at breakfast. Spine perfectly straight. Vocabulary precisely calibrated to make everyone in the room feel slightly less than. She was not rude to me. Not exactly. She was something more refined than rude. She was dismissive. She asked about my family with the polished curiosity of someone who already knew exactly what she would find and had already decided it was not impressive enough. My family was from a small town in Tennessee. My father was a retired school teacher. My mother had worked at the county hospital for 30 years as a registered nurse. They were good people. Honest people. People who measured wealth in something other than square footage. Eleanor never said anything explicitly unkind about them. She simply never missed an opportunity to remind my husband of what his family represented and what marrying me had cost him in terms of legacy. The estate was the heart of all of it. His grandfather had built a regional construction empire from the ground up over 40 years. And when he passed, he left behind a trust valued at somewhere close to $8 million. His grandmother had added to it before her own passing. The trust was structured to pass to my husband at 35, with certain conditions attached. One of which was that any children he had by that age would be included as secondary beneficiaries. Eleanor was the executor of the trust until his 35th birthday, which was still 3 years away when all of this happened. She liked that power. She had organized her entire identity around it. My husband's sister, Vivienne, was 2 years younger than him and had inherited her mother's talent for appearing perfectly pleasant while actually sharpening a blade behind her back. The two of them were close in the way that people become close when they have spent years reinforcing each other's version of reality. Vivienne had never warmed to me either, though she was better at hiding it than her mother. She called me Di with a brightness in her voice that never quite reached her eyes. For 2 years I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that every new wife has an adjustment period with her husband's family. That Eleanor's coldness was grief for her late husband, still working itself out. That Vivienne's distance was simply a personality style, and not a verdict. I told myself these things because my husband told them to me. And because I wanted to believe him. And because the alternative that the family I had married into fundamentally did not want me in, it was a grief I was not ready to carry. The pregnancy changed the calculation entirely. We had been trying for nearly a year. When the test came back positive on a Tuesday morning in early September, I stood in our bathroom for a long time just holding it, listening to the city outside our window, coming to life in the ordinary way that cities do, not knowing that everything was about to become extraordinarily unordinary. I was 8 weeks along. My doctor confirmed it, at the appointment 2 days later, twins. 2 strong heartbeats on the screen. Impossible. And perfect. My husband cried. He held my hand in that examination room and he cried. And in that moment I believed with my whole heart that we were on the same side of something. That whatever complications existed between me and his family, this 2 new lives, his children, our family would be the thing that finally settled it. I believed that because I needed to, and because he let me. We decided to tell his family at the monthly Sunday dinner. He thought it would be a beautiful moment, announcing the grandchildren at the family table. Something to remember. I had a small, quiet reservation about doing it that way. A feeling I could not quite name that I tucked away in the back of my mind and ignored. That reservation would come back to me later. Loudly. The dinner was at the estate. There were 8 of us at the table: Eleanor, Vivienne's husband, 2 family friends who were practically fixtures at these gatherings, my husband, and me. The meal was catered. As always, the table was set with china that had been in the family for 3 generations. I remember thinking how strange it was to eat pot roast off plates that were worth more than my first car. My husband stood up between the main course and dessert. He put his hand on my shoulder. And he was smiling. And he told them. He said that we were expecting. That it was twins. That we were thrilled. The table reacted. The way tables do. There were exclamations. There were questions. There were glasses raised. Vivienne stood up and hugged me. And I felt her hands on my back. And her voice in my ear said, "Congratulations." Die, with that familiar brightness that was just slightly too bright to be entirely real. The family friends were genuinely warm. My husband was beaming, and Eleanor sat at the head of the table and smiled with her mouth. After dinner, as people moved toward the sitting room, Eleanor asked if I would join her in the kitchen to help her with the dessert arrangement. It was not a question that could be declined without making a scene. I followed her. The kitchen was enormous and spotless. She moved to the counter and began arranging slices of cake on plates with the deliberate precision she brought to everything. And for a moment, she said nothing at all. Then, without looking up from what she was doing, she said that she hoped I understood that twins complicated things significantly from an estate planning perspective. She said it in the tone of someone discussing a mildly inconvenient logistical problem. I told her I was not sure what she meant. She looked up then. She told me, very calmly, that the trust had been structured for a reason, and that my husband's grandfather had very specific intentions about bloodline and family legacy, and that given the timing of everything, and she paused just long enough on the word timing to let it land, she thought it might be wise for me to speak with an estate attorney before we proceeded any further with announcements. I am an estate attorney. I told her that. She smiled and said she knew that. And she was sure I understood then exactly what she was implying. What she was implying was that she doubted the children were my husband's. She was telling me to my face. In her kitchen, surrounded by 3-generation china and expensive candles, that she believed I had gotten pregnant by someone else and was attempting to use it to access the family trust. She said it without saying it. The way she did everything with perfect plausible deniability, and a smile that never touched her eyes. I stood there for a moment, and I made a decision that I now recognize as the most important one I made in the entire ordeal. I did not react. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. I picked up 2 of the dessert plates, carried them to the sitting room, set them down, and returned to makes to my husband for the rest of the evening as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and I was already thinking like the attorney I was. The following weeks were a slow, methodical escalation. Eleanor began making comments to my husband that I was not meant to hear, but clearly was questions about whether I had been under unusual stress at work. Observations about my behavior being erratic. A mention that she had heard through some unnamed source that I had been seen having lunch with a male colleague more than once. Small bricks, laid carefully. Building a wall. My husband listened to them. That was the thing I kept coming back to. He listened to them. He did not immediately dismiss them the way a man who trusts his wife should. He came home one evening and asked me gently if everything was all right. If there was anything I wanted to talk about. In a tone that had a question underneath the question. I told him I was fine and watched something flicker across his face that I chose not to examine too closely. I installed a small audio recorder in my home office after that. I am an estate attorney. I know how evidence works. Thanksgiving arrived with the cold efficiency of an appointment that cannot be cancelled. We had it at the estate again. A larger gathering this time. Extended family, traveling in from 3 states. I was 14 weeks pregnant. I was starting to show. I wore a dress that I loved. Deep green. And I remember standing in front of the mirror before we left and thinking that I looked like someone who had things under control. The first part of the evening was fine. The way the first part of things often is when a storm is building offshore. I talked to relatives I liked. I ate well. I laughed genuinely at a story my husband's uncle told about a fishing trip. I let myself believe, briefly, that I had miscalculated the threat level. That Eleanor's comments had been the paranoid reaching of an old woman protective of her money. And that the rest of this pregnancy would be the straightforward joy it was supposed to be. At 9 o'clock, Eleanor asked for everyone's attention and said she had something she needed to address. Because she believed the family deserved honesty more than they deserved a comfortable lie. The room went still. She stood at the front of the sitting room, with the carriage of someone who has been rehearsing this moment for weeks. And she told her entire family that she had significant concerns about the paternity of the children I was carrying. She cited my lunch meetings. She cited an email she claimed to have seen, though she declined to explain how she had accessed it. She said that she had consulted with the trust's legal team, and that as executor, she had both the standing and the obligation to raise this issue before the births. I felt my husband's hand on my arm. I could not tell whether it was protective or restraining. Vivienne was sitting across the room. I watched her. She did not look shocked. She was looking at her hands. Eleanor finished speaking and looked directly at me and asked, in front of approximately 22 members of her family, whether I would be willing to submit to a prenatal paternity test. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a public humiliation. It has texture. You can feel it against your skin. Everyone in that room was waiting to see what I would do. And the ones who loved Eleanor were waiting for me to crumble. And the ones who did not know what to think were waiting for some version of the truth to emerge. And I was standing there, 14 weeks pregnant in a green dress. I loved being asked to prove in front of a room full of strangers that my children belonged to my own husband. I said yes. I said it clearly, and without hesitation. I said I would be happy to submit to any test she required. And that I expected the results to be shared in the same public forum she had chosen for the accusation. Then I looked at my husband and I waited. He said nothing. That nothing was the end of something. I felt it go. 3 days later, I was at my own office when my assistant told me Eleanor was in the lobby asking to see me. I had her sent up. She sat across from my desk in the chair I reserve for clients. And she told me, in a tone that had lost some of its practiced elegance, that the trust contained a clause. She was prepared to invoke a morality clause. She called it obscure language her father-in-law had included decades ago, language that allowed the executor to delay distribution in the event of conduct unbecoming to the family's standing. She intended to use it to freeze the trust, pending the paternity results and a broader review of my marriage's circumstances. I let her finish. Then I opened my desk drawer and placed my recorder between us. I told her I had been recording our conversations at home since early October. I told her I had documentation of every comment, every insinuation, every carefully constructed sentence. I told her that the morality clause she was referencing had a reciprocal provision that she had apparently not read carefully, one that also applied to executor conduct, and that using estate resources to harass a beneficiary's spouse without legal cause constituted a breach of fiduciary duty that I was fully prepared to litigate. I told her that the prenatal paternity test she had requested in front of her family had already been scheduled, that the results would be ready in 2 weeks, and that my attorney, a colleague of mine who specialized in exactly this, had already drafted the complaint we would file the moment she took any further action against the trust. She looked at me for a long time. The elegance was still there, but something behind it had shifted. She left without saying anything further. The paternity results confirmed what I had known they would. My husband received them and called me, and there was something wrecked in his voice. Something that might have been shame if he had been capable of fully inhabiting that emotion. He asked me to come home so we could talk. I drove home and sat across from him at the kitchen table that we had picked out together at a market in Savannah, on a trip we had taken the first year we were married. And I listened to him tell me that he had not believed his mother. Not really. But that he had not known how to, and he searched for the word for a long time, how to intervene. He said he should have stood up at Thanksgiving. He said he was sorry. I asked him one question. I asked him, when his mother asked for everyone's attention and stood up in that sitting room, in the moment before she spoke, did he know what she was about to say? He looked at the table. That was my answer. He had known. He had sat beside me in that room, his hand on my arm. And he had known. And he had not warned me. And he had not stopped her. And he had not stood up the moment the first word left her mouth. He had let it happen because stopping it would have required a courage he did not have. And he had decided, consciously or not, that his relationship with his mother was worth more than my dignity. I stayed in the house that night. I had things to do. Over the next 3 weeks, I did what I do. I worked. I pulled every document related to the trust. I found 3 separate instances in Eleanor's 5-year tenure as executor, where she had made decisions that existed in the gray area of her authority, 2 disbursements to a private account she controlled. 1 instance, where she had redirected investment funds against the written advisory of the trust's financial manager. None of them were the kind of thing that screams fraud immediately. All of them were the kind of thing that screams fraud once you put them next to each other in a timeline. I brought this to my colleague. She brought it to the probate court. The court appointed an independent trustee to conduct a review. My husband called me 3 times the day the court filing became known. I let the calls go to voicemail. I listened to them later. In the first one, he was confused. In the second, he was worried. In the third, he was angry in the particular way people get angry when they realize they have been standing on the wrong side of something and there is no longer time to move. The independent review took 4 months. During those months, I gave birth to my twins, a boy and a girl. Both healthy. Born in late March, on a morning when the light was coming through the hospital windows at that specific angle that makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. My mother flew in from Tennessee and was in the room. which was exactly right. Because the people inside your room when the most important moments of your life happen should be people who have earned that place. My husband was there too. We were not separated yet. We were in that strange suspended state that some marriages enter before they finally admit what they already are. He held our son and he cried. And I believe that part of him was sincere. And I also believe sincerity is insufficient when it arrives this late. The court review concluded that Eleanor had made improper disbursements totaling a little over $300,000 from the trust over 5 years. She was removed as executor. A criminal referral was made to the district attorney's office. My colleague filed the civil complaint on my behalf for the harassment and the Thanksgiving incident and the attempt to invoke the morality clause without legal basis. Eleanor hired 3 attorneys. They settled within 6 months. The settlement is confidential. But what I can tell you is that my twins' education accounts are fully funded. And my home office has been renovated into something that better suits the work I now do. Because by then, I had left the firm. I had given a lot of thought to the shape of the life I wanted. I had given thought to it in the hospital room, and in the months of depositions, and in the long nights when the twins were up at 3 in the morning, and the house was the particular quiet that makes you examine things you have been avoiding. I had built my entire professional life inside a structure that belonged to someone else. And I had built my entire personal life inside a family that had decided before I arrived that I did not belong. Both structures were now compromised. I was 30 years old with 2 children, and a clarifying anger and a very specific set of skills. I opened my own practice. It took 9 months from the day I filed the articles of incorporation to the day I signed my first independent client. I worked from a spare bedroom for 4 of those months. I took on 3 cases that I genuinely believed in and charged less than I should have because I needed the experience of being accountable only to my own name on the letterhead. My mother came down for a month to help with the twins while I worked. My father drove down on weekends and sat on my porch and drank coffee and told me stories about his students. And I remembered what it felt like to be surrounded by people who were simply plainly glad you existed. My husband and I formally separated when the twins were 11 months old. It was not dramatic. It was the way things end when both people have known for a long time that it was ending not with a single breaking point, but with the accumulated weight of 100 small decisions to look away from the truth, until the truth can no part it longer be looked away from. He moved into a condo across town. He sees the children twice a week. He is trying to be a better father than he was a husband. And I allow that without bitterness, because the children deserve the best version of him I can make space for. Regardless of what he gave me, Eleanor did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that. The criminal referral resulted in a plea arrangement, probation, restitution, and a formal bar from serving as executor of any trust going forward. It is not the maximum consequence. But I have learned, in the long months since all of this began, that waiting for the maximum consequence is a way of staying chained to someone else's story. The consequence I needed was the one I built for myself, not the one a prosecutor delivered to her. Vivienne sent me a text message 8 months after the settlement. It said only, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." I read it 3 times. I did not respond. I think there is a version of forgiveness that looks like silence, not the silence of suppression or fear, but the silence of a door that has been gently and permanently closed. I closed that door with something close to kindness and walked away from it. My practice is 2 years old now. I have 4 attorneys working with me. We specialize in estate law and trust disputes. Specifically, cases involving executor misconduct. That is not a coincidence. I know this terrain better than I know anything except the faces of my children. I know where the loopholes live, and I know how people hide behind them. And I know exactly how to take them apart because I have done it once under pressure with everything I loved at stake. And I found out that I was capable of it even then. What I want you to understand, what I keep coming back to, when I look at the life I have now versus the one I thought I was building, is that the danger was never Eleanor. The danger was the story I told myself about loyalty and endurance, and what it means to hold a family together. I had been trained, the way most of us are trained, to treat tolerance as a virtue, to believe that staying is always the braver choice, to understand difficulty as something to be absorbed rather than removed. Nobody tells you that some difficulties are not asking to be absorbed. Some difficulties are asking you to leave. The woman who drove to that Thanksgiving dinner in a green dress she loved, who sat down next to her husband and believed that love was sufficient armor. I do not look back at her with embarrassment. She was doing what she had been taught. She was operating on the information she had chosen to accept. But I am grateful, every single day, that she was also someone who knew how evidence worked. I was at my office last Tuesday when my daughter, who is now 22 months old and has opinions about everything, climbed up onto the couch in the corner of my office where I keep the small toys for when I need to bring the twins with me. And she handed me a wooden shape, a yellow circle, with the absolute gravity that toddlers reserve for the delivery of important objects. My son was on the floor, building something that kept collapsing and being rebuilt with increasing determination and zero discouragement. The office was warm. The city was outside the window. Everything that was supposed to reach me was locked outside. There is a version of security that is about what you have, the square footage, the title, the trust fund, the marriage that looks right from the outside. And then there is the version that is about what cannot be taken from you, the competence, the clarity, the knowledge that you survived the thing that was supposed to break you and built something real from the parts of yourself that held. I spent the first part of my adult life trying to earn entry into someone else's empire. I spent the rest of it building one that cannot be taken from me because it was never inherited. I made it. Every brick, every client, every sleepless night, every document that I understood better than the person who thought they could use it against me. I am 31 years old, and I have a practice with my name on the door and 2 children who hand me yellow circles with the full weight of their confidence in my ability to receive them properly. That is wealth. Not the number. The feeling of knowing that the people inside your walls are safe. If you are somewhere in the middle of something that is asking you to be smaller than you are, to absorb what should not be absorbed, to tolerate what should not be tolerated, to stay quiet in the room where someone is publicly dismantling your reputation while your husband sits beside you and does nothing. Please hear this. Your legal rights, your professional skills, your documented evidence, your clear eyes, your mother on the phone at 11 p.m., your ability to recognize what is actually happening, even when everyone around you is invested in a different story. These are not small things. These are the foundation. Build from there. I would like to hear from you. If you have navigated something like this, a family that tried to use money and power to push you out, a moment where you had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself, tell me in the comments below. The stories that are hardest to tell are usually the ones most worth telling. If mine found you at the right time, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There are more of these stories coming. And every single one of them belongs to someone who decided to stop waiting for permission to survive. Your clarity is your most powerful asset. Do not let anyone convince you to trade it for their comfort.